Okay, important times ahead, guys. They've been talking a lot about this autumn and stuff that's going to happen in September. It seems to be in a very important time. Um, the Pope is going to be talking for the very first time to the American government in America. And we think that the agenda is to do with climate change, the new climate change and total world agenda, which the kind of world powers are wanting to sign, called Agenda 2030. Now, at the moment, we've already got Agenda 21, which is operational and very much concerned with climate change and so on and so forth, and also many people would say to do with the reorganisation of society, basically from rural and farming societies to much more city-based societies where the corporations are actually controlling more of the countryside and making areas of reservations so that the population are basically gradually assimilated into towns and not really independently farming and so on in the country. You can see all of this for yourself if you look through Agenda 21. It lists certain things, for instance, saying that car use is unsustainable and that all sorts of things are unsustainable. And bizarrely, this seems to be very linked into the fracking industry. Now, why the fracking industry, how this can fit into sustainable living is puzzling to everybody, including those who are completely in favour of the climate change agenda and so on, which of course isn't everybody. There's a lot of controversy over this. Apparently Jeremy Corbyn's brother, with his very long-standing worldwide weather company, also believes that CO2 emissions are only a very, very small part of the overall climatic changes we're experiencing. And so he believes to base our activities and laws on merely CO2 emissions, more or less, in terms of the climate strategy, is very, very misguided, because it's such a complex issue that we need to have a very complex and malleable mindset in order to understand how it works. Now, what's concerning many people all over the world is that they are concerned about the manipulation that is going on with climate change and manipulating the figures and manipulating the agenda, if you like, and that some of this is actually to do with consolidating the power of the international corporations. It links with things like the TTIP international agreement. It links with the Agenda 21 and the Agenda 2030 that I've spoken to. It links with the Pope's visit. It links with the imminent declaration of world government, if you like, which a lot of people are saying is what the September celebrations, if you like, where there's these all sorts of meetings going on. And a lot of people say that it is about this, in a sense. It's about the beginning of world government. But I think that the world government, or the world working together in terms of the top people and the policymakers, has been going on a very, very long time. I mean, people are just waking up to this, and the fact that a very, very small number of people who are in, for instance, the Seven Sisters oil cartel, the bankers, the the governments, the the people behind all of this. I mean, also a lot of the charities and the NGOs are sort of part of this agenda, and are really, when you look at it, working on a global basis in terms of the policies that they're putting out. Now, one of the things that was brought to my attention, it hasn't been particularly advertised in the local press or the national press, now I'm British, is that in Yorkshire, which is very near me, 2 of the power stations are closing. Now, I think between them, these power stations produce at least probably 10% of the UK's power. Now, these are to be closed very quickly after announcing it. Apparently, they are to be closed by the autumn of next year. Now, these are coal-fired power stations, and so these will be emitting reasonable levels of CO2. So the reason these will be closed is to meet the climate change initiatives, the sustainable climate change initiatives, which of course is being signed this autumn. This is going on, I think, in Paris, so this is slightly separate to the Pope's visit to America, but I think they're all connected. Now, as I said earlier in my talk, this is an extremely complex issue. It's been manipulated, basically. If you look into it, you will find it is manipulated. I'm not saying CO2 isn't important, it is. I'm not saying that coal-fired power stations are wonderful. They're probably not. But nonetheless, for life to go on and people to do their jobs and people to live, we have to have power, and obviously we can move to sustainable power, and that can be done in different ways. I mean, there are actually all sorts of options. Obviously, we've got the solar, we've got the wind farms, we've got the tidal power, and so on and so forth. Some of these are already going ahead. But the extent to which those can step into the breach quickly is debatable. How quickly those particular energies which are up and running can come into the equation and replace these power stations which are closing. Also, there's a power station in Scotland which is closing, which apparently is the second biggest in the UK. So I'm concerned about this, and my feeling is that this is probably connected with the fracking agenda. Now, fracking is the most terrible way to make energy. It's very inefficient, and it's absolutely massively devastating on entire communities. It's hugely polluting. It is far worse than a coal-fired power station, far, far worse, and the impact of fracking will be felt all over the country. It's absolutely terrible. Now, my fear is that by creating a shortage of power, by making there less power available, by suddenly closing these power stations, it is going to drive up the oil price and basically fuel the fracking boom. And this will be absolutely devastating for the UK. Now, when I just googled these power stations being closed. There's Eggborough Power Station, there is Ferrybridge Power Station, and the one in Scotland is Long Thanet. Apparently there's also another maybe 30 in the UK that might be closed very soon. When I googled them, I discovered that power stations all over the world are being closed. Power stations in New Zealand, power stations in America. This is a global policy. These guys who are mostly about like 95, all of these white guys from the right families or whatever, there's just a handful of people and they are setting the agenda for everybody, the whole world over. And the number of times this has happened, I can't tell you. When I've Googled things with education, I've Googled things with all sorts of stuff. And the things I'm concerned about in my community are coming up in communities all over the world. So this is a global policy. We're not being told about it. We're not being told it's a global policy. In fact, the whole issue with the power stations and what impact that's going to have has barely graced the pages of any of the papers, which are normally full of absolute rubbish. So, you know, my question is, Jeremy Corbyn is completely opposed to fracking. He thinks fracking is absolutely terrible, which it is. It is good, you know, it is absolutely poisonous. It is a poisonous thing. So his brother is an absolute expert and realizes that CO2 emissions are a very small part of the issue. We're looking at something here which is basically a situation where there is creating a fuel crisis on purpose, in order to drive the fracking agenda forward. Now, I presume that Jeremy Corbyn would want to keep these power stations open. I think we should keep them open. We should phase them out gradually when we've got a better alternative. And believe me, there are loads of better alternatives out there. There is ways to make clean energy that we haven't even touched the surface of yet. And the reason we haven't touched the surface of it is because it's so clean and it's so cheap, and the Seven Sisters oil cartel do not want it to be revealed that this is possible, but it is possible. Anything is possible. We do not have to destroy the country. We do not have to destroy the world with fracking, which basically fracking is, it's destroying the pure water supplies by making them radioactive, filling them with chemicals. It's stealing the water from the people because huge trillions of gallons of water are used and wasted. Then that water is radioactive. It has to be buried in like a radioactive material. Where's it going to be buried? There is nowhere to put these trillions of gallons of water where it isn't going to flow into all the other water, because water just meets water. Then the other problem is you're putting all this, forcing this water down underground. You're undermining the whole geological structure of the earth. The other problem is you've got these huge, massive fracking rigs. They only last for 12, you can only do 12 fracking operations. Then you've got to take the rig down. You've got a huge area of land that's been cleared of all its trees and wildlife and things. That area of land is also spoiled because it's been it's been sort of effectively poisoned. You've then got to have a fracking rig somewhere else. So you're talking about a tiny area, like maybe a tiny borough, and you're talking about possibly having 900 fracking wells in that area, which is proposed to happen in an area near me called Rydale. You've also got the issue that the water is very likely to be polluted, maybe not initially, but eventually, because just in the nature of, like I say, you can't control where water goes. You can't bury all of these trillions of gallons of water and not expect them to sink into other water. And besides which, when you put all the water down, all those many fracking little tubes that go everywhere underground, you can't get all the water out. A lot of it stays there and it just seeps into all the other water. And what's happened in America and Australia is that that green grass has died, trees have died, the insect populations have been decimated. This is going to have a massive knock-on effect with wildlife. So you've got all of your little wildlife, your birds, your bees, your insects, your small animals like your hedgehogs, and your bigger animals. You've got the knock-on problem with the cattle and your farming and your sheep, because those animals are vulnerable. They're going to be affected by the environmental degradation, which is mainly taking place in the slightly more rural areas. So then that has a knock-on effect with people who eat meat, because obviously then if they're eating meat, or they're drinking milk, or they're eating cheese, then those products are affected. You have exactly the same problem with fruit and vegetables that you eat, because the fruit and vegetables are grown in a country and they use water, and that water may well have been affected by the fracking. You then have a huge problem with your own water supplies. People in America have found that their water supplies are actually full of gas, and that they can put a match to them and ignite them. People have had all sorts of, there's been birth defects, there's been all sorts of incidents going on with people getting rashes, people getting ill. Somebody fell in the fracking fluid and died spontaneously of multiple organ failure 48 hours later. The stuff that they're putting into this stuff is noxious. And the whole water issue as well is the fact that you're using huge quantities of water, which is pure water. For instance, in my area of Yorkshire, we've got very clean, in North Yorkshire particularly, we've got clean air, we've got a lot of rural activity going on, and we've got by and large reasonably clean water. This water is going to be taken by the oil companies, by the fracking companies, and it's going to be filled with a huge cocktail of chemicals and then rendered radioactive. Now, this is going to mean that the amount of clean water available for people to drink is going to be much smaller, so it's going to put the price up, and it's also going to mean that we probably can't in the future rely on water coming out of our taps. It's absolutely criminal. The companies, the energy companies that are doing this are actually owned by the banks. So if you are in any way worried about the bankers ripping you off, then let me tell you that the bankers are ripping you off in many ways, not just financially. They're after the air that you breathe, they're after the water that you drink, and they're after the food on your table, and they're also after the roof over your head, because if your community has been devastated by fracking, then you will find that your house is also worth a great deal less money. Now, what can we do about this? In your country, my country is UK, if you belong to something like Facebook, then it's good to join all of the Facebook groups. There are lots of Facebook groups that are around the country for the different frackers. Join them all. If any application comes up for fracking, as a person in UK, you're allowed to write in and object to that application. Make sure you support the people in other areas, not just yours. Because what we need to have is, we need to have huge volumes of people actually opposing this. And the same, if fracking comes up anywhere in the country, do your best to oppose it, because that could be your area next. You never know when it could be your area. And we have to help each other, because it's just numbers. It's all about numbers, and it's all about waking people up to this absolute transformation of life as we know it, because life as we know it won't be the same if this goes ahead on the scale that it's been planned, which is literally thousands and thousands of fracking wells all over the country, and particularly over the entire north of England. But the south of England isn't immune either. It's going to really affect everybody. So get involved. Tell everybody about it. Think about how it's going to impact you. It really is a huge, huge change, and we need to take action.